Hello, so this is part 2 of a Substance video I made. If you haven't seen part 1, it's already up on my channel. I split it because it was way too long, so we're just going to dive in from where we were last time. Yeah, check out part 1 if you haven't. So I'm just doing a quick iRay render here. You can kind of see it is quite important to be rendering kind of as you're going along. Here I can see that these cracks aren't showing quite as distinctly as they are in the viewport when you've got actual subsurface being calculated. Also, this gold here is looking a bit more high frequency than it was in the viewport. So I know that I'm quite happy with that, but if it was too much, I could tone it down. Cool, so next what I'm going to do is I'm going to show how in this you can see there's a bit of kind of rays as if these chip pieces have been glued back together, but kind of imperfectly. Some are kind of popping up, some are a little bit indented. So let's just quickly set that up in a couple of places. I didn't do it everywhere because I didn't want to overkill it. I think this is a really good place to illustrate it. So we're going to go to 1002 because that's this UDIM, and this is going to involve some hand painting. So basically, we've got our instance here, instance as it's calling it. We want it to go between that, but underneath the gold, and we're just going to add a new fill layer. Surprise, surprise. And we're just going to keep it height. So what I was trying to achieve with this is basically, instead of just raising it up completely, I wanted a bit of a gradient so that it looked like it was, rather than just raised, it was kind of angled. So I was achieving that with a ramp, and if I tried to explain it, it probably wouldn't make sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to show you. So I'm going to put a ramp into the height, and I'm going to add a black mask to that. I'm then going to just go to the mask, and inside of that, I'm going to add a paint layer. And I'm just going to paint it here under this gold as well, so that on the height, I want the gold to replace. So I'm just going to put gold replace instead. Cool. So it's now just affecting that porcelain instead of where it was when it was linear dodge, which is default. Then the gold is also getting affected because this gold is then being added on top, but I want this gold to just be normal or replace on top. Great, so now this fill layer in between the gold and the porcelain instance is affecting this now. So I've got this ramp here. I'm going to, first of all, just bring the height down a bit. So I don't know quite how this ramp is being applied yet, but what I can do is if I change the scale of this to quite high, so for example 50, you can see I've got a ramp where it's going in, then it's going out, then it's going in, then it's going out, so it's repeating a lot. So I don't want it quite that much, but that just kind of shows what's going on. And then I kind of want to get it so that I have the ramp running from the bottom to the top without any repetition. So there, that kind of works. So I know this scale kind of works for this chunk here. Obviously way too much, but then I can use these offset features to play with this a bit. This ramp is basically going to look at like this shard has been put back in, but at a slightly incorrect angle. By adding a ramp that displaces it different end from one to another, it looks like it's just rotated out of place. If I were to bring that down a lot, you kind of see that a little bit better. The scale there isn't quite right, so I'm just going to set that to 16 and move it up a bit. So if I turn that off and on, you should see what that's doing. I think maybe, and then I can change the balance of this as well if I want it to be a bit more out or in. And it really is quite subtle. And here I haven't gone in and painted that edge as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this, duplicate layer. I'm going to delete the, I'm going to add a black mask. Then I'm going to go in, remove all the height data again. Remove the height data for this. Now in theory, it's because it's set to replace again. So I want this one to go back to add, and now great, cool. So now I've got this gold. Just looks a bit neater. Doesn't look like it's blending between. Cool. So in theory now this should look a little bit nicer. I'm also going to up. This is going to be set to 1024 still. So I'm going to up this to 2K like the previous bit, just to give us a bit more resolution. Cool. So that shows it a little bit better. But basically, we've kind of got this angle, and you can kind of just play with the ramp a bit. I can just rotate the original ramp by going to the ramp settings. Something like that. So it's, in some places it's popping out a bit here, and then in some places it's popping in to look like it's kind of been reattached but incorrectly. Again, really quite subtle, but just adding that in a few places, especially here, that I think it works quite nicely there, and just making sure the gold kind of seeps over so it looks like it has been glued back together. You wouldn't really know what's going on, but it's just kind of details like that really help kind of sell it. Very subtle, but just adds a bit of wonkiness to it. And so, yeah, if I were recreating this again, I would go in and do it to multiple sections. But this video is getting long. Cool, so next I'm going to do the stand. We don't actually need the instance on here at all, so I'm going to remove that. Cool, and I'm just going to throw on, I'm going to use another smart material. Find a wood that works. Don't want it to be too... Oh, this walnut looks right. Let's throw that on. Again, substance is great because you can just use these smart materials, but you do kind of need to understand what's going on underneath, so I wouldn't recommend just throwing them down willy-nilly. It's a good idea to kind of get an idea of this. So let's... Don't like that noise colour, so I'm going to get rid of that straight away. That's quite nice. And that is also quite nice. This sharpen as well. The displacement's way too strong on this though, so I'm just gonna, let's find out which one, the height. Okay, so it's this one. So I'm just gonna go here, and it's already set to 9, so I'm just gonna set that to like 3. Yeah, that's better. And you can see here the way the projection's working. Which one's that? That's coming from here. So how's that? That's being projected with UVs. So there's a bit of stretching on the UVs, which is causing that. I could maybe get rid of that with triplanar. But that itself could actually bring a whole host of other problems. Yeah, it just looks a bit too repetitious. I'm going to leave it as it is for UVs. I'm going to set that back to 1. But it's just something to be aware of. You can see it in my final one as well. If you look closely here, you can see there is some stretching and some weirdness going on these UVs. And if I was hand painting in Mari or something, or using projections, I'd be able to get rid of that a lot easier. For a personal project like this, not a huge issue. For, I mean, you can't even really see it from there. But if this were at work, then that may well be picked out on. Cool, and then what I'm going to do next is I'm quite happy with that. The kind of base bit you can kind of see here like I've done. I mean, I might as well, I can just set one up myself actually. Let's do that. So I'm just going to do a fill layer. We want this, first of all, this needs to be metallic. You can see how that changes the way that the shader reacts. I don't need normal, and actually I probably do, because otherwise I'm going to pick up the wood normal. I'm just going to do everything. Scattering I definitely don't need actually. Color, let's just do something a little bit bronzy. Not too much color though to detract from the rest of it. Also don't want it to look golden as well, so let's try something like that for now. Change that height to normal, and there we go. And that's stopped the wood underneath showing through, because by default it was set to linear dodge, which just adds whatever is happening on top. And that's just the way that that handles by default. And now we've got rid of that wood thing. So I'm just going to add a black mask to this. Cool. And then I'm going to set this up by hand. So the way that I did this one is, rather than paint it, I'm going to use the geometry select tool, which is this one here. I think it's geometry. Is it? Polygon fill, they call it. So I'm just going to go like this and sort of select every face. Annoyingly, there isn't a super easy way to do this. Also be aware that it will be selecting faces underneath. And I can just press X to unselect stuff, and that's changing the color here, so that way I can get rid of things if I wanted to. Cool, so that's going to do for that. So I'm going to pop back to the paintbrush and you can see how that's done. So this is quite smooth at the moment. So we haven't actually set up a custom mask yet. So what we're going to do is we're going to do that. I'm going to put this into a folder. I'm just going to call this bronze. Or something I don't really know what it's supposed to be. And then you can see that that's picked up the wood again, because the folder also has its own blend mode. So I'm going to set that to normal. Again, we get rid of that. So inside of here, I'm going to add another fill layer. Ooh. I'm also going to, this base, I didn't change any of the other settings apart from the color, so I'm just going to quickly hop back to that and change the roughness to something. Cool, so on a new fill layer, we're going to do this one just as spec roughness for now. I just want to break up this. By default, it's normal. I'm going to just go to add, just that I get the value from underneath. And I'm going to put a procedural on it. Again, probably one of the wipes. Big fan, big fan. Let's throw that one down first. That's good, but let's change the scale. Too much. And so you can see here it's gone on everything because this mask that I've got on this original fill layer isn't on the folder. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take this mask. I'm going to go copy mask, right click on the folder, and I'm going to go add black mask and then paste it in to mask. There we go. Sweet. So now I can remove this mask because it only needs to be on the top there. And then I can play around with this. That scale's a bit too repetitious. I don't actually, this looks weird. I don't like this one. I'm gonna just try some others. That's a bit better if I blend it. There's a bit of detail there. And then let's get something just on the edges. And then let's add another fill. Oh, sorry. Let's go here. This is going to be roughness still. We'll do, let's do this grunge dirt. Cool, that's quite nice. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this just on the edges and kind of in the crevices. So what you can do is you can use these smart masks, which I haven't actually touched yet. So I could just drag and drop, for example. Let's have a look at surface worn. This is probably going to look great, and I won't want to not use it. But so that's put it everywhere but the edges. Or I could try, I'm going to undo that, and let's try dirt dry, which is fine. But again, knowing how to construct these is super important inside a Substance if you need to make something yourself that you need to match. So I'm going to right click, and I'm just going to go to add black mask. And in here, I'm going to go add generator. On generator, I'm going to go to, so there's mask editor and there's mask builder. Legacy, so Legacy tells you it's the old one, mask editor is the one I use, so that's the new one. And then this is basically how a lot of these smart masks are constructed. So you get all the options. So there's things that we baked at the very beginning, like ambient occlusion, curvature, and stuff like that can now be used. So I'm going to switch over to mask mode here, and this is showing us what will get this dirt layer in the spec roughness. So by default, it's got curvature, that's what's giving some of the shape. And I think that's probably everything. So it's just curvature that's turned on. So I'm going to turn curvature all the way to the top. And then if I click this button here, I can go in and I can, at the moment, these are the settings. I've got a lot of big curvature, but let's say I just wanted the small edge bits slightly finer. Then I can turn these down so I've just got the soft or the fine details, or vice versa. I can do just big details by just playing with these sliders. Here we've got modes, so we can do edges, we can do cavities, which is kind of the inverse. They're like internal edges. And then we've got dual as well, which will do both. So I'm probably just going to do dual for now. So let's see straight away how that's looking. So you can kind of see at the edges, it's picking it up. It's kind of cool. That looks pretty good. Obviously that mask looks super like CG. So what, on top of this curvature, let's add a few other things. So we've got texture, we can change the contrast, we can change the blur if we want a bit softer. So actually I'm going to blur that out a bit. We've got thickness, which will be based on the thickness that has been baked. We've got position, so you can do, this is a really great one if you just want to do the bottom of something, like if you're doing a street lamp or a wall, and you want just the bottom to get dirt. We've got world space normal, but I'm going to use, we got AO as well, so ambient occlusion, which is quite a good one. So now it won't go around the feet. So I'm going to actually leave that on because that's quite handy. But this texture opacity I quite like. So texture, basically, you need to tell it which texture you're using, which you can't find in here. You have to go all the way to the bottom. And then we've got two slots here called texture and texture secondary. So you just need to make sure you plug something in there. So let's throw in, so this is just going to be for a bit of breakup. I'm going to use another, let's use this grunge dirt. That's kind of cool. Now you can see that's being applied on top. Because I've got this global blur at the top, then that's going to blur it a bit. But let's see something like that. And you can invert this as well, so you can do that the invert of that texture, you can tell it how that texture is being applied on top. So at the moment it's overlay. I could multiply, which would eat in rather than doing an overlay, or you can do add, which would just add. Obviously that's adding a lot more than I want, and I want it just around the edge. So blending modes, it's super important to know what a blending mode is and how they work. Triplanar, you can kind of choose how it's applied. If you're getting seams and stuff, that's super useful. So let's have a look at this. So you can see here on the edge, it's quite subtle. I'm just gonna set the texture set to 2K. See if we can see it a bit better. Oh yeah, there we go. That's quite nice. I'm gonna add a separate fill layer for the height. So let's add another fill. This is edge spec R. Fill, this is gonna be our bump. This is gonna be in height. It might end up being normal detail actually. I'm just gonna see how this goes. Let's go to procedurals again. These dirts are quite good, but I worry that's gonna be too much in scattering. We could turn off as well. Obviously I wanna turn that down greatly. Even still too much. So what I'm gonna do is I can add a levels onto this. So I can right click and go add levels, and then I can just bring this up. It needs to make sure it's on height, and I can just bring this here. As long as these numbers stay roughly equal distance from 0 and 1 to each other, then it would stay fairly balanced. What I could do is I could add a mask on top of that. So if I go black mask, and then let's add another fill, use this fractal sum, and then that way we just get a little bit of breakup on that. Can contrast that a bit more. I'm actually going to invert this. It looks like it's bumping out. I'm going to see how it looks bumping in. So a quick way to invert this, if I invert this texture here in the top fill layer, that's because it's linear dodge. So if I set that to multiply perhaps. I think it's the way Substance handles height data, I think, to do with, don't think it uses 50% gray. So let me try a different one, overlay. If I do just normal, turn this levels off. Oh, there we go, it's probably that levels. Yep, so if I set this to 0 again, let's just remove this levels. Set this to 1. I'm gonna add another fill mask. So that, quickly pop that back in. Just to get a little bit of contrast. So it's not completely everywhere. And I can change the balance so that if I change the balance there, then it's only really eating in. There we go, so it looks, it's only kind of happening in this area, which is probably to do with the scale of it. Now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to show how I did that plaque on there as well. So I'm going to use the same bronze material, but I'm going to duplicate it because I want to change the height value of it. So we're going to call this bronze plaque, and we're going to add a black mask. And then we're just going to go to, what we'll do is I'm going to use the polygon fill tool again. You can do it on here. Which bit is this? It's here. Just cool. Just going to make sure this is, the underside's gone. But on this one, instead, I'm going to go to the base level of it. I'm going to go to the height, and I'm going to raise it up a bit. So we've got this weird edge again. That's partly to do with the displacement. Also, the sampling of the displacement in Substance can be changed in the shader settings, I'm pretty sure. Down here, we've got subdivision count, and that will even out this line. You can see there. Let's fix that a bit. I think that's too high. And then what I'm going to do is I'm also just going to apply a slight blur to this mask. So I'm going to go add filter, blur, just see if that helps at all. It probably won't. I can do the very slightest, 0.0205. And then another touch I added to this, you can kind of see there's some screws here. So to do the screws here, I'm going to add another fill layer. I'm going to do it in folder actually, and we'll just call this screws. Pop the fill in there, and then just add a black mask to this folder. So in this fill, we want it to be metallic. First of all, we'll paint the mask first, and then we'll sort the properties afterwards, just so I can see where it's going. So there's some cool brushes that I was using. I can't remember where they are though. Under alphas. So I just used one of these. Let's pop that down. So just do that for now. And I'm going to pop back into this. I'm going to set metallic to 1. Roughness, we're going to make quite high. Height, that's the important part. We want that to come up so they are higher than this currently is. A little. And scattering and the like, we don't need that. Normal, we don't need. Metal, we do need. Roughness, I'm just going to throw something in. Just a quick procedural so that it's slightly different. Let's do a fractal sum again. Just so that the highlight pings ever so slightly. I mean, these are too big at the moment. So what I can do now is I can go back to this and just scale them down a bit. Cool. So it's basically done like that. And then for the engraving, I just further added some text and stuff that I set up in Photoshop. A bit more spec roughness on this would be quite nice. So let's add that to the bronze plaque. Just going to add another fill layer. We want procedurals again. Let's do a grunge leaks. A bit too strong and the scale's a bit off, but let's just do that. Let's change the rotation as well. So it's normal at the moment. I'm going to set it to linear dodge so that it doesn't make it any more reflective. It just makes it less reflective. I'm actually not a fan of that texture, so let's try something else. That's quite good. Not a huge amount of contrast, but I can play with that myself. Yeah, it's pretty good. Cool. So in general, that's pretty much how I made the base. So I've just done a quick test render in Iray, and I've noticed that A, the cracks aren't coming out quite dark enough, so I'm going to change those a bit, and B, the subsurface is really strong. Like this looks like a little too waxy. So I'm going to change that, but I'm not going to change it right now purely because I quite like how it shows it in the viewport. It shows you enough, but if I were to turn it down just for the renders, then I wouldn't really see that in the viewport. So those are things that you can kind of tweak whenever you like, really, but I would recommend whatever helps you the most whilst you're texturing, and then you just tweak any actual shader bits right at the end, like this scale and stuff. I'll leave them for now, and then right at the end I can change that. So yeah, I've got it running again. The render's just going now, and these cracks coming through a bit more, maybe slightly too much, but this is one of the good things about Substance is you can kind of look dev it as you're going. Although it might not look 100% like you render it in the viewport, you've also got this other Iray renderer, and that just makes things super handy. So I would recommend taking advantage of both those things. Cool, final stretch now I hope, because there's nothing worse than doing something once than doing it twice when it takes a long time. So we're going to go through how I added this detailing around the edge. So yeah, let's get started. Cool, so I'm going to 1001. We're going to have to break it up ever so slightly now, because as much as I want all this stuff instanced, this paint isn't going to work because I need to get rid of these leaves on this section. And while I could paint it out, I can't paint it out in an instance because then it's going to affect everything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to copy this instance, copy the layers. I'm going to go to 1002, the other texture set. So I'm going to remove this instance now. And here I'm just going to paste layers. Cool. So now I have access to this folder and I can add whatever I want inside of it. And I can hand paint stuff instead of doing it procedurally. So Substance, it's great to do stuff procedurally, but it will get to a point potentially where you can't use instances all the time. It's frustrating. They said that they're doing UDIM painting, so hopefully eventually this will be an issue of the past. So if you're watching this in the future, hopefully it won't affect you. It's sweet time to load. So I'm going to hide the other texture sets. So we've just got this one. So I'm going to go down to the paint. And I think the easiest thing to do for this is I'm just going to go add white mask. I'm just going to paint out these sections. And then I will add a separate layer for the hand painted detailing. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to get the brush. At the moment, I've still got it set up from before. So is that all right? Still got this screwdriver thing. So I'm just going to go to brushes. Let's just do basic hard will do. Just paint this all out. So I don't want any leaves on this center section because I'm going to be adding hand detail there. Cool. So first up, let's add the rim to this. I'm going to do it just on this bit. I'm going to get rid of just around the rim. If I was being a bit neater with this. I would spend a bit more time, but I'm not, so I shan't. Cool, so that's all clean now. So let's add a new layer. I'm gonna add, this is just gonna be hand painted. Easiest thing to do is copy this blue layer, this blue fill, any of them really. I'm just gonna copy that, and I'm just gonna put it in this hand painted one. And I will delete the mask. We'll just clear that out. So now whatever I paint in here, in theory, it'll have blue. Cool. So for this rim, quite simply what I did is I just did some radial symmetry, which is this button here to do symmetry, and then you can change the settings of it. So I'm going to do mirror, and I want radial symmetry, which you click here, and I'm going to do as many as I can. So I think it goes up to 16. Yeah, exactly. And I want it to go all 360 degrees around, and you'll see why in a second. I just need to make sure as well that my midpoint is correct. So if I go on here, I want it to go all the way around the rim, which it's not. So we need to fix that. So if I go to mirror symmetry, and I just need to find basically where the line is. So that dot there, I don't know if you can see that because it's so small. So I need this to be on 0. And this, let's see if that works. Seems to. Oh, no, that's not right, is it? So I need to move up ever so slightly. Let's try 48. Gotta love a bit of. Hey, that seems to work perfectly. Cool. So to get it like these leaves, what I'm going to do is I am going to change my brush settings. And this is what I did when I painted it the first time. I'm going to pick the soft first of all, but I'm going to change the settings of this brush. So I want the flow, I want a bit of an airbrushed feel. Looking at Chinese kind of pottery and ceramics, they often have kind of build-up of color. Let's bring across a reference image. So if we look at this one, you can see we've kind of got these different layers of the deepness of color. So you can see it's quite soft underneath, and then they've built it up, built it up, built it up. So I'm going to try and achieve that, and the easiest way to do that is, rather than changing the opacity, changing the flow so that I can just hold it for a little bit longer to get it more opaque. This bit, it doesn't matter too much. It's more an issue for the inside, but I might as well set my brush up now. So I'm just going to do this, something like that, making sure it's fairly even. The good thing about the radial symmetry is I only have to do this once, and it's kind of perfectly colored in. And then what I'm going to do is, so I was just looking at patterns online when I was doing this, and I'm going to turn the flow up ever so slightly now. I've just inversed the brush, and I'm just going to make sure they're all perfectly close to each other, because if I do it slightly too far apart with one of them, you'll see it every time there's radial symmetry on every section. So here you can kind of see we've got one here, we've got one here that bit too far apart, so I can just fix that by going over it and trying to fix that. Perfect, so that's a bit better. And then all I did, just for a little bit more detail, so it's not super boring, but there we have it. Done that quite quickly. And now I'm going to add, if we have a look back on this one, let's have a look what we've got next. We've got this pattern here, so that's super simple to do. Let's do that. So again, I'm going to go back to this exact same layer. I'm going to move this across just so I can see it ever so slightly better. And I'm going to, so you can kind of see what the flow is doing there. It's just building it up, and it just means the edges slightly more organic. Organic is what I call messy. Just makes it sound a bit better. Cool, so something like that. And then all I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pattern underneath that. So I'm going to copy this layer again, just so I get exactly the same color. Copy, and then paste layers, pop it underneath, just so that this line sits on top of it. And you can see it's doubling up there. So I'm just going to remove, I'm going to add a black mask, and that'll just fill on top of this. And then I'm going to add a fill layer. Oh, no. I've added a fill layer rather than a fill into the mask. Let's undo that. So we've got this here, and then I'm going to right click, add fill there. There we go. Cool. So now we've got a fill layer here. I'm going to make this black for now, and I'm going to import another resource. This was another one I made in Substance Designer. This was based actually on some vases I saw on Google, some cloisonné, Chinese cloisonné vases. I really like the pattern. I was going to originally try and create something like this. But then when I decided to do more ceramic-y pottery rather than cloisonné, which is a completely different style, I thought the black and white pattern was pretty cool still. So it's here, and I'm just going to pop that in. Perfect. So I want this. Obviously, I'm going to need to mask out on top of that so that it's not everywhere, but we'll get that afterwards. First of all, I need it to project properly. So let's change the scale first of all. So I want it to follow around this as if it's kind of radial around that. So a plain UV projection isn't going to work. If we look at triplanar, that's also not going to work. I'm getting weird blending where the angle of the object changes. So instead, what I'm going to use is a spherical projection. Spherical projection. So basically what that's doing is it's projecting it in a round sphere. So I want to pick the middle of this bit for that. So it's still a bit weird at the moment. I'm just going to try and roughly find it. Something like that. And then I'm just going to play with these settings like rotation. Let's see if that does it. Nope. It's one of these. Oh no, it's 3D rotation, isn't it? So it'll be one of these. And you'll kind of feel when it's right. There we go. Something like that. So I need this to be, let's try 90 on here. Let's see if that works. No, that's still not it, is it? So I want it to basically run round here. So trial and error. Maybe I just need to move in a bit more. There we go. So that because at the moment it was a bit further forward. So we want it kind of in line with that axis. That's a bit better. We're still getting poles here and we're getting poles here. So I want the pole to be, instead of on this axis, I want it to be along here. So I am going to rotate it now. And just to get rid of that pole. There we go. Perfect. So now, 90 degrees, shouldn't have a pole anywhere. And yeah, this is exactly right. So the pattern is exactly the same the whole way around. A little bit stretched, but I can change that with the scale. Cheat that ever so slightly, just to get it a bit better. But I'm also going to change the scale down ever so slightly anyway, just to get slightly nicer effect. Because of the way the projection works on this curved surface, then you are seeing slightly different sized here to different sized here. I'm kind of okay with that, you know. I did try and fight it before when I was doing this the first time, but it's just not something that you can really correct. So I've also got a seam here. I did have that last time, so what I can do is I can rotate this around so the seam is at the bottom. So I just need to find the right axis for that. So it's this one here. If I just change that to 90 degrees, then the seam will be at the bottom and the top rather than the sides, and it's just a little bit more conspicuous. So I don't have a seam there. It probably is just one seam actually, isn't it? Yeah, so I've now got a seam down the end. And that's the best place to hide it, really. If you knew it was only going to be seen from one side, then you could probably tuck it to the other side. But for me, that's pretty good. But yeah, that looks pretty good. So all I need to do now is just mask this out. So this is already a mask, so I'm just going to add another paint on top. And that paint is going to multiply. And I'm just going to fill the entire object for now with black. Cool. And then I can just go in and probably easiest to hand paint this, you know, rather than polygon paint all those sections. And I'm just going to go in. And I'm going to change my brush flow up again because I want this to be quite a hard mask. And there's a hardness parameter at the bottom of every brush so that I just get this. And the reason that this line is quite nice is it just means making that mask is a bit easier. Whereas on the bottom I've got to perfectly line it up, so I'll probably go back in and add a line there. Just to give me a bit of a border, a bit easier to paint. Again, Mari's Smart Selection tool is fantastic for this. You could do this in seconds. There might be a way to do that in Substance. I'm almost certain there isn't. If there is, it would be a dream, because stuff like this, that takes quite a long time, can be done very, very quickly. That said, Substance has some things that Mari doesn't do quickly, so each to their own. And if it was a big object, if it really did take long, then if I was at work and I was having to do this a lot, I would probably make those masks in Mari. I'm assuming you can import masks into Substance. Let me just check. Maybe you can't. I would hope that you could. Oh, it's not liking that. What's going on here? It knows I was talking shit about it. I'm on the right one, right? So this is Michael from the future. Here we had a slight technical issue when I was doing this. I did manage to get it fixed. It was something weird with the substance mask. But I paused the recording to try and work it out so that I didn't spend loads of time sorting it on camera. And then stupidly forgot to unpause. So in a few seconds, we're going to jump forward in time to when I realised, after having finished the rest of it, and then we're going to go back. But this mask, I finished pretty much the same way I'd been going, just painting it around. So we're going to skip the rest of that and jump to the next bit now. Cool. So guess who accidentally went through more of it and had the recording paused the whole time? Cool, let's redo this. So not only am I doing it twice, I'm doing it 3 times now. Cool. So now that I finished this section off, which I had, and I added a ring, I don't know if that's been recorded, but I did exactly the same with Radial Symmetry. And I realized I could have painted this entire mask with Radial Symmetry, which would sped up the whole process. But I didn't because I'm an idiot. So what I've got is I've just done another layer, and I'm just going to delete these for now. Got another layer here, and I'm just going to paint on the face. What am I doing on the face? I'm going to just copy some Chinese pottery. I had an image up somewhere. I'm going to just do one of these leaves because it's quick. Maybe I'll do a flower this time because I just did a few leaves. On the actual thing, you can see I spent a little time on this scene. And it's not perfect by any means, but just making things a bit smaller meant that the detail held up a bit better from afar, whereas now I'm going to do one kind of big detail, and it won't look as good, but I've done this version a lot quicker than I did the original. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a paint layer, and this will be my background, the kind of soft bit, and then I'm going to add another paint layer, which will be my darker lines. And that just means that if I make a mistake on one, then it doesn't ruin the other bit, kind of like how you paint in Photoshop. So I'm just going to block in some rough shapes. I've noticed with these kind of pottery things, it does feel very airbrushed. So I've got the flow really low on the brush, and I've got the hardness all the way set down to the bottom. This is just the default soft brush, I think, or it might even be the hard brush, and I've just changed the roughness of it. Sorry, not roughness, the hardness. Cool, so something like that. And then now I'm just going to go in, bring the flow up about 50%. I'm just going to paint the lines over. So a bit less thick, as if it was a bit thicker, kind of hand painted. And I'm just copying a design to the right of me, so if it looks crap, blame them, not me. Also, it's probably going to look crap. Yeah, if I was doing this in Mari, then I would be doing it probably with projections from a cleaned up image in Photoshop, and then I just project that through. But because this is Substance Painter and the contest was all about what you can do inside the software, I thought it showed it off ever so slightly better to hand do it. There is no steady stroke, I don't think, in Substance. I'm not sure if I've covered that already. I don't know what has and what hasn't recorded because I stupidly hit pause on it. Not a huge fan of this actually, but it will do. And then I'm just going to go back to the underneath layer and then highlight some bits like this just to help bring out the shape a bit more. Just make it a bit darker towards the edge. One thing I found as well is adding filters like I did before, like slope blur. Let's add a blur slope to this. That's way too much, but let's find another procedural. Let's do something like spots this time. See if it's a bit slightly smaller frequency. Bring the intensity right down. Yeah, cool. So something like that. It just looks, I mean, this looks a bit like it's chipped away, and I kind of wanted it a bit more watercolory, so maybe the blur will help. But just to give it a look like it's got some imperfections on it. And it just helps, really helps break up the silhouette there. So that looks a little bit like an anus, I'm realizing as I stare at it now. Good one, Michael. But it's a very lovely anus that I've spent time painting. The problem with this slope blower as well is it's going to make everything go a lot slower. So I'm not going to use this as a thumbnail on YouTube because I don't want it to get removed for inappropriate content. But yeah, if I had a bit more time as well, actually, you know what, I can do it with Radial Symmetry. Let's just add a few more flowers just so that it looks a bit less weird. So on this, I'm just going to paint some leaves like I had been doing, making sure my recording isn't paused. And then finally, just add a bit of color in the background. Just something like that. Pop that slope blower back on. See how that looks. Probably a little bit too much from far away though. Looks alright. That looks slightly less anusy. And finally, let's just go through how I added this kind of concrete-y, exposed, not unglazed kind of ceramic section. Ceramics don't really chip like this, but I guess if you had dropped something and you glued it back together, maybe the glaze would have maybe come off. So when you glaze stuff, basically you hand paint it on. If something isn't glazed, then it looks kind of stony. So yeah, I was just playing that up. So the glaze sits on top. When I'm doing materials, usually I kind of build it from the inner layer base. So if I'm doing a metal with paint on top, I would do the metal underneath and I'll do the paint on top, and then I will mask out the paint and I'll tell it where to sit on top. So if there's any scratches and stuff, they'll live in that mask, and then that's when it will expose the metal underneath. With this, I'm going to do exactly the same thing. So we've already got all our porcelain kind of set up here. So I want this concrete to sit underneath this porcelain material. Because this is no longer instanced, because I changed that earlier, then that's good. I'm just going to find a material for now. I think I used a concrete last time. This concrete, let's try concrete dusty. Oh no, I think I used concrete bare. So I'm going to slit this just under the porcelain, and then so you can see it's already adopted the height, so I just want to change the height here. I just want this to be normal so that it doesn't get dictated from underneath. And so this porcelain, let's add a white mask to that so it's everywhere, and then all I'm going to do is around the feet. In theory, if I set this to black, it's not doing anything though. Let's have a look. It's because my flow is super low, isn't it? Yeah, dip. Change the hardness back up. Cool. So now I'm exposing this concrete underneath. So I kind of just did it around here in the original, and then I'm also just going to fill in this section as if it's cracked and crumbled away. So it doesn't look great at the moment. We're going to fix that. Just kind of getting the material slapped down, just making sure that mask is all right, but I can fix that afterwards. Cool. So just even that out ever so slightly. So I'm just going to go to this concrete material. First of all, I want to change the height. So because this is a preset material, then some of these things can be locked off, but under the technical parameters, I know we've got the height range here, so I can just lower that, and I can basically, oh no, sorry, I don't want to do height range, I want to do height position, and that way I can get it to sit inwards rather than outwards, as if this glaze is exposed on top of it. I don't want to go too much because I'm getting some funkiness here. And I'm also going to change the range. I don't want it to look really spiky. A little bit would be nice just so that it picks up from far away. But just something that's still a bit... Oh no, that's all right. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the tone of this ever so slightly. I just want it to be slightly warmer. See if we can't find a yellow on the hue. Not too much. Oh, that's just taking it back to 0. What I can do on top of this is I can just add a filter as well. And then let's try color correction maybe. Maybe get rid of some of that contrast in the midtones. So yeah, I had it a bit more sandy in the original, like that. I've changed the scale quite a bit, so it looked a lot more kind of high frequency. But I'm actually quite liking this because, I mean, this guy looks tiny to me, although that plaque probably isn't helping size scale wise. But let's just set that to 2 for now. Also, that height map is quite extreme, so I'm probably just going to change the height range again, just because there's a little bit of weirdness. And I'll just change the position to, let's do 0.47. No, let's do 4.8. I think the easiest way actually to correct this, very cheap, is I can just fill it with the color I want. I do this occasionally if I'm wanting to cheat grading textures or reference in Mario. I often do this just with a fill. Just put a fill on top and then blend it over ever so slightly. The base color I need to watch out because I'm on height here. Base color, just something like that to warm it up. A little too little. And then, but because that's blending on top, then I'm just going to bring the contrast back up with the original. And it's hitting this color correct. Just going to pump the contrast up ever so slightly, just to get some details back in it. Cool. Then very finally on top of that, actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add another fill. I'm going to do a fill layer. And I'm going to, how do I want to do this? I'm going to add a procedural. I'm going to add a procedural dirt just because this is looking very flat. Let's do a procedural cloud. Procedural clouds for now. Just do it as overlay perhaps. It's a little bit burny. What about screen? Is it actually doing anything? Let's try changing the scale of this just to see if it's working. Something like that. Actually, I'm going to just multiply. I don't want it to get lighter. Oh, no, wrong one. Something like that. Yeah, cool. Up the contrast a bit. But what I'm going to do with this is I'm going to add a smart mask. I'm just going to use a default one, just so that it maybe hits on the edge. Dust occlusion is nice, but it's a bit soft. So maybe let's do, I think dirt cavities might work. Let's try that. Very subtle, maybe too subtle. Let's see what dirt dusty does. So that's just added on top. Actually, I need to undo that one. Dirt dusty, what are you saying? That's quite nice. There's a little bit of detail there now. And then maybe gun edges, which is probably going to be a bit too hard surface. And I'm just going to add that on top. Getting a little bit, and then I'm just going to go back to soft edges. Again, quite a cheap way to just get a bit of detail. It's not the most efficient. Like, this is looking a little bit too much there. It looks a bit spotted. So which one's that coming from? That's coming from that first one, so I'm just going to bring that all the way down. Just as something. But it looks a little bit bare without that. Cool, yeah, and so that is really just the basic process of how I created this. Obviously this took a little bit longer, a bit more finessing. Added a plaque, I added my own name to the plaque. But in general, everything that I've gone through, don't know how long this video will be in the end by the time I cut it up, but hopefully not past 2 hours. So yeah, this is the final thing. It really does look like the bargain basement version of this. Obviously with a lot more finessing, it would look better. This bit especially looks really bad here. The cracks aren't looking quite as nice here, and that's because I spent a bit more time in the masking aspect of it, just getting nicer mask rather than just using one cloud like I did. Yeah, obviously spend longer hand painting this. The gold looks fairly similar actually. I worked up the lines a little bit more, just kind of broke up the straightness of them here, but here they look fairly similar. But I haven't gone in and highlighted all the edges like I was showing with the displacement where I doubled it up. I've done it in some bits. Yeah, I think that's about it really. I hope you got something out of this. I probably textured this all in all without the cuts like I've done this, probably about 3 hours. This one took about 2 days. So it is amazing what Substance can do very quickly. In Mari, I would have spent a lot longer doing it. Even with the new material system, it is good, but it's slower. Granted, I think I would have probably got a nicer result, but sometimes you need speed, and the look deving in Substance is one of the things it does so well, which other pieces of software don't quite yet. I'll probably do a video Mari versus Substance eventually, because I do use both on a daily basis at work, much more often Mari, but they have their pros, they have their cons. Yeah, I don't really know what else to say. I've got a couple of other videos coming up. I'm going to do a ZBrush one, the second part of that intro to ZBrush, but this time will be actual sculpting. If there's anything that you would like to see, please leave a comment below. And you can see the full images of these over on my ArtStation. Link will be below. Cool. All right. I've been Michael Wilde. This has been a very long look at retexturing this slightly less well. Take it easy. Best of luck, whatever you're doing in 3D, whether that's modeling, whether that's texturing, whether that's whatever you like. Yeah, have a good one. Cheers.